If it's a hot summer night, you can really get the feel of old Baltimore by just driving around certain areas and gawking at the families who drag their furniture outside and live in the street to escape the humid hell of their row houses. They even plug in their TVs with extension cords and seem oblivious to the tractor-trailers that rumble by a few inches from their family get-together. The men usually wear clam-digger-length cut-off jeans and nothing else. They seem quite eager to air out their beer guts in the summer breeze and stare blankly at the TV screen. The women always have their hair in rollers, and sometimes, if it's especially hot, they'll just wear short shorts and a dirty white bra. They'll give you the finger if they catch you staring too intently. If you're feeling especially nervy, go into the bars. I don't mean the discos, punk rock hangouts, or cocktail lounges. I mean the really scary bars like the Wigwam. Pat Moran called me excitedly one night to tell me, "You should have been at the Wigwam last night. I was so terrified that I had a wonderful time." The head barmaid, Miss Charlotte, is at least 48 and has a staggering wardrobe of 1960s mini outfits. You find a style you like and you just stick with it, she says. Miss Charlotte sometimes dances half nude on the bar as freshly released convicts and alcoholic psychopaths cheer her on. "They're too drunk to see it," she confided to me, "but they sure can smell it." Once, a black-armed robber pulled a gun in the Wigwam and announced, "Okay, you white motherfuckers, get up against the wall and I'm going to blow your brains out." Nobody paid him any attention, and he eventually passed out. Another favorite strange bar is near the waterfront. The clientele is made up of hillbilly truck drivers who come to cruise the half-finished sex changes, who hang out in between medical appointments at the nearby Johns Hopkins Hospital. An extremely butch lesbian, whose blackheads around her lips popped every time she smiled, explained to me that even she could hustle the truck drivers, they were so horny. Drinks are dirt cheap, and if you ever make the mistake of leaving a tip on the bar, the barmaid panics and chases after you yelling, "Hon, you left a quarter!" The old-time lesbian bars are perhaps the scariest of all. Don't expect a warm welcome. I usually try to keep a very low profile and stand in the corner and just watch as all the butch Johnny Cash lookalikes slow dance with their femme girlfriends to country and western hits. Judging from the missing teeth and tattoos on these women, I gather they like to fight and would love nothing more than beating the shit out of a man, so I never try to strike up a conversation. If all this local color begins to wear thin, go to the movies. Baltimore always gets the roughest exploitation films, and the distributors test out the worst ones here to see if they'll work. One of the local film critics refused to review any film that played in a particularly rough downtown theater after she was verbally abused and horrified by a pack of truant hoodlums while attending an opening day matinee. In the inner lobby of this theater, someone has scrawled on the entrance door, "If you come through this door, you be killed," and the management has never seen fit to wash it off. In the 1960s, another downtown theater had the world premiere of Slaves, starring Dionne Warwick. As the star got out of her limousine, she was surrounded by what she thought were fans and prepared to sign autographs. I'll never forget Dionne Warwick's face as she heard a young jitterbug sneer, "Hey, Dionne, you bitch, give me $1. Come on, bitch, you can afford it." Most movie producers make the mistake of living in New York or Los Angeles, and you can tell by their films that they've lost touch with real America. Baltimore is about as close to reality as I can get, and I've found it's the only place I can really work. No one bothers me. They figure if I still live here, I couldn't be that famous. If I'm thinking up a film, I go out on the streets of Baltimore for a little inspiration. If I see an especially strange-looking character, I start following the person, fantasizing how peculiar their life must be, and exaggerating it to ridiculous lengths to fit characters in my films. I eavesdrop on conversations and pick up great dialogue, such as the time I overheard an angel dust casualty tell his girlfriend, "I can't go out tonight, hon, because I have to take my grandmother to the hospital to have her tattoos removed." Sometimes I just sit on the street and wait for something awful to happen. I'll never forget the day I saw an old bum hawk up a big Luger and prepare to spit it out. At the exact moment the phlegm left his mouth, a secretary dashed from a building and received this surprise package square in the eye. Another memorable day, I was doing costume research by sitting on some white marble steps and watching strangers' shoes as they passed by. As I concentrated on an amazingly authentic pair of white go-go boots, I looked up and saw a harried motorist toss from his car window directly into my face all the soiled carry-out wrappings from a Chinese dinner for six. As I wiped the soy sauce from my hair and reflected on what a great scene this would make, I realized I was a very lucky man to be able to live in Baltimore and experience firsthand all these beautiful moments of truth. Baltimore has a tradition of great eccentrics. Any town that gave you Madeline Murray O'Hare and Spyro Agnew has to have something going for it. One local do-gooder has my complete respect, and I think the city of Baltimore should give her an honorary dinner and place her in their Hall of Fame. Her name is Mrs. Mack, but she is more widely known as the Rat Lady. Every day she climbs into her van, the Ratmobile, and searches slum neighborhoods for rats to kill. Concerned citizens call her to alert her to any rat trouble spots. Her volunteer helpers kill the rats with sticks, but Mrs. Mack actually chases the rats and grabs them with her bare hands. "They wouldn't dare bite me," she is often quoted in the newspapers and on TV. I am incredibly jealous of her mission in life, and if someday I decide to retire from filmmaking, I hope Mrs. Mack will find room for me aboard her rat patrol. Although she is quite serious about her one-woman crusade, Mrs. Mack has managed to keep a great sense of humor about her profession. She used to be a registered nurse, but decided that being a rat executioner was more rewarding. Nursing was a 24-hour-a-day job, she explained. This way, the hours aren't as long, but I'm still helping people. Another prominent citizen who has my total admiration is Maryland Governor the Honorable William Donald Schaefer. He is the most fanatical of all the Baltimore boosters, and praises the city to such outlandish lengths that he easily wins every election. When I heard that he donned a pair of bunny ears for a neighborhood Easter egg hunt, I knew he had my vote forever. The governor told me to continue making films in Baltimore, and every time I see him, he has an encouraging word. I doubt whether he's ever seen my films, but I think he's read about them and decided that if they get any image of Baltimore around the world, good or bad, it has to have a positive effect on the city. It makes it a lot easier to work knowing the city is behind your twisted vision. The one citizen of Baltimore who does not encourage me to make films is Mary Avera, chair idiot of the Maryland State Censor Board. Appointed and supported by Maryland's most corrupt governors, this 8th grade dropout is responsible for viewing every film that plays in the commercial theaters or on college campuses. If she rejects the film for any reason, it is illegal to show it in Maryland, the only state with such a board. I never bothered to submit my early films to the censor board because I figured they wouldn't have the nerve to bust a church screening. But when Pink Flamingos started making a lot of noise, she stopped a screening at the University of Maryland. Mary Avera was appalled at seeing my work for the first time and demanded 3 cuts: the chicken fuck, the blowjob, and the artificial insemination scene. She left in the shit-eating, which says a lot for the community standards of Baltimore. When the approved version finally opened at the University of Maryland and the Charles Theater to huge grosses, I realized Mary Avera was the best press agent I could have. After I finished my next film, Female Trouble, I took it personally to screen it for the board so I could have my premiere without any trouble. Mary Avera greeted me with a rude, "Why don't you get a haircut?" She didn't bother turning on the sound because she can't cut dialogue, only sex, due to the First Amendment. I was startled to see Mary Avera's eyes darting from film to film as she yelled out, "Reel 1, cunnilingus! Reel 3, rear entry!" Rear entry? As the secretary dutifully noted her observations. "You're going to have to make some cuts," she declared as the end credit came up. "There's nothing obscene in my films," I said politely, expecting her standard reply of, "Don't break bad with me." "Oh, yes, there is. I let you off easy last time," she said, referring to Pink Flamingos. "People call all the time telling me I should have cut that dog duty scene. You have to cut this one or you can't show it. I'll call in the Attorney General, and he's so religious he won't eat my meatball sandwich on Friday." Another board member put on the offending reels and ran through a particular scene and stopped the projector and pointed with a ruler. "You can't have this vagina shot," he explained. "That's not a vagina, that's divine. He's a man." The censor looked confused and approached the image to get a better look. His eyes focused in on Divine's old cheater, and he shrugged his shoulders and let it pass. He ran the film for a while and stopped it again. "Well, this scene is definitely a violation. Cunnilingus." I looked at the scene as he ran it back and forth over and over, scratching the brand new $1,000 print that I had planned to use for the premiere. I knew you couldn't really see anything in the shot because the whole thing was completely simulated. He looked at the girl sitting on the guy's face and said, "She can sit there, but she can't move." As I pondered this profound order, he ran the scene over again, and I pointed out that there was no actual contact, but he insisted I cut about 1 second that he felt was obscene. Not having any money to fight the censors in court at the time, I agreed to the cut, realizing that it wouldn't make any aesthetic difference since it was almost subliminal. Maria Vera raced back in triumphantly and handed me a pair of scissors. I had to cut the scene out myself, and the print was now marred with an ugly splice and irritating sound jump. I handed her the $16 censor fee. She typed out a receipt for one cunnilingus scene and gave me the required censor seal to splice in the leader of the film. Everyone at the sold-out premiere booed when the censor's logo flashed on the screen. When I went back with my next film, Desperate Living, I was ready. I had a good censorship lawyer and was ready to fight the censor board in court. Once again, they demanded cuts, but I refused. They sent an attorney general's assistant in to watch the film to decide if it should be prosecuted. He met with me afterwards and laughed. "They really hate your films, you know, but bad taste isn't illegal." Relieved that he had such a good sense of humor, I thanked him and left with a censor seal for the uncut version. When Maria Vera was asked her opinion of me by the press, she was quoted as saying, "You should see some of the movies he brings into this office. There should be controls on this kind of garbage. I don't care what he says about me. I ignore him completely like he doesn't exist. The only man I fear is God." Casting. If you're ugly, it's much easier to break into the movies these days. By ugly, I mean noticeably hideous, not just run-of-the-mill unattractive. If you weigh 800 pounds or happen to be without a limb, you have a much better chance of being noticed by a casting agent. Nobody cares if you have a Farrah smile or a Burt Reynolds chest. These are a dime a dozen. Look at all the supposedly good-looking actors that litter the Hollywood unemployment lines. Who goes to the movies to see average good looks? To me, beauty is looks that you can never forget. A face should jolt, not soothe. A lack of teeth can be quite charming, and severe acne is always a plus. If you think you're creatively ugly and want to break into the silver screen, how do you go about it? Sending a resume is the first step, but don't bother listing all the tired one-act plays in which you starred. Concentrate on the glossy 8x10 that will catch the casting agent's eye. My casting agent, Pat Moran, who knows ugly when she sees it, always looks for special talent that we can utilize. One applicant, an aspiring actor of 16, listed only one credit in his career. He played the Easter Bunny in his grade school play and had the balls to admit it. Pat roared with laughter, but it got her attention and she continued to read his resume. She noticed that he had listed under physical description the fact that he had only one leg. Since amputees are ideal for dismemberment scenes, just put on a fake leg and hack it off. She raced to the phone to offer him a job. He seemed quite eager, but his parents grabbed the receiver, gave us a lot of abuse, and vetoed the idea. We could only wonder what had happened to the good old pushy stage mothers of yesteryear. Another pointer for the would-be ugly is to be aggressive. Deluge the casting agent with atrocious shots, and if you don't get a response, send even more. One actress from the Bronx sent me repeated packages of self-promotion, and when I noticed a snapshot of her beating her own children, I really got interested. In her letter, she claimed that she weighed over 250 pounds and was willing to gain more. Try to meet the director's friends and badger them to push your talents when casting time rolls around. Through the grapevine, I heard of a young actor with a talent that fascinated me. He had a trick asshole that he could open to an unheard-of diameter and then snap it closed, giving the appearance of a singing asshole. I thought this sounded perfect for one of the acts at Divine's birthday party in Pink Flamingos, and got word to him that I wanted a demonstration. He showed up at my door, and I tried to be tactful. I hear you have something I might be interested in. He nodded his head and suggested we go up to my studio. Without batting an eyelash, he whipped off his pants, threw his legs in the air, and began auditioning his anal opening. I was totally speechless. A star was born. He got the part immediately, and audiences have been thrilled by his asshole all over the world. On one particular showing of the film in New York, his cult fans leaped to the stage and began opening and closing their assholes at the same time. To me, this was the ultimate in audience participation. When I was looking for a black actress who weighed 400 pounds to play the killer maid in Desperate Living, want ads in show business and backstage only produced chunky rejects from local productions of Porgy and Bess. The Washington Post refused to run my ads, wanted 400-pound black actress, claiming that they were discriminatory, but the Baltimore Sun obliged. Each night, dozens of huge black women waddled into my apartment to audition, and I know my doorman must have wondered, God, what's he into now? Most were either terrible actresses, self-conscious about their weight, or simply not fat enough. One got quite hostile when I gently explained that she just didn't have the necessary tonnage. Another brought her sister along as a bodyguard, fearing she was being lured into a snuff film. When I mentioned the fact that a little nudity was required, there was a stampede for the door. One opened the interview with, "I'm a very religious woman," and was immediately sent home. Pat Moran eliminated the others with a tactful, "I'm sorry, you're just too pretty for the part." In desperation, I asked a black actor friend if he knew of anyone to fit the bill, and he recommended Jean Hill, a 5'1" black actress who was just a few pounds shy of 1/5 of a ton. We set up an audition. Nervously awaiting her arrival, I prayed she could be the special one. The doorbell rang, I opened the door, and there she was, my dream come true. 400 pounds of raw talent. I carefully invited Jean in, and the first thing she did was goose me to totally unnerve me. She asked for a drink, and she got it. She laughed and said she had no objection to nudity. "I've got a lot to show, honey." Would certainly dye her hair blonde. Big deal, I've had blonde hair twice before. And asked for a special chair that wouldn't break when she sat on it. After listening to her give a hilarious reading from the script, we went over the contract, I gave her an advance on her salary, and it was settled. A few final words of advice to the aspiring actor on the ugly circuit. Forget the casting couch. Directors want to film you, not fuck you. Never take offense when jealous idiots look down on your unique physical appearance. Just remember that you will be working long after the so-called beauty queens are washed up. No matter how self-confident you become, use caution. If you are trying out for a part and the director is getting upset for any reason, get out while you can. At a recent audition in Detroit for a play, the director bludgeoned the actress to death. One can only assume her reading was less than spectacular. Desperate Living. After Female Trouble, the follow-up to Pink Flamingos, I decided what I really wanted to do was make an X-rated movie without any sex or violence. But since I had already used sacrilege and scatology as themes and figured that crippling diseases such as polio might turn audiences off, I decided to play it safe by making a lesbian melodrama about revolution. Desperate Living is a monstrous fairy tale comedy dealing with mental anguish, penis envy, and political corruption. Its target audience is very neurotic adults with the mentalities of 8-year-olds. The plot of Desperate Living is quite simple. Peggy Gravel, Mink Stoll, an upper-middle-class hysteric, is released from the mental hospital only to taunt her cloddish husband and abuse her terrified children. Her 400-pound maid, Griselda, Jean Hill, sympathizes with her and kills Peggy's husband by sitting on him and squashing him to death. Peggy and Griselda flee Baltimore, but are held captive by an oddball motorcycle cop, Turkey Joe, with a lingerie fetish who tells them about Mortville, a fantasy town where criminals can exist as long as they submit to the humiliating living conditions demanded by the Idi Amin-worshipping tyrant Queen Carlotta, Edith Massey, and her gang of male goons. Arriving in Mortville to seek criminal amnesty, Peggy and Griselda rent a room from Mole McHenry, Susan Lowe, a super-masculine lady wrestler, and her 50-year-old girlfriend Muffy St. Jacques, Liz Renay, an oversexed murderess accused of smothering her babysitter in a bowl of dog food. Meanwhile, the wicked Queen Carlotta is on a rampage, trying to stop her rebel daughter Princess Cuckoo, Mary Vivian Pierce, from having an affair with Herbert, a janitor in the local nudist camp. After Griselda is killed in a karate fight with a fascist goon, Peggy panics and defects to the Queen's side. Hoping for political power, she goes along with the Queen's demented plan to infect everyone in Mortville with rabies. Mole wins the Maryland lottery and then sneaks off to Baltimore to buy guns and get a sex change. Upon her return, Muffy and the other women of Mortville plot a coup d'etat, seize power, cook and eat the Queen, and turn Mortville from a hellhole of a hamlet into a living American city. I really went wild when I received word that Liz Renay, one of my all-time favorite media celebrities, had agreed to come from Las Vegas to Baltimore to portray Mole's fleshpot girlfriend, Muffy St. Jacques. Liz Renay was my idea of total glamour. Her life was filled with adventures and insanity, and read like a script from one of my own films. Born in Arizona and raised by fanatical religious parents, Liz ran away to become a winner of a Marilyn Monroe look-alike contest. She advanced her career to V-Girl during the war, Showgirl, and Hollywood starlet, and eventually became gangster Mickey Cohen's girlfriend, and soon built a reputation as a trusted mafia moll. Refusing to cooperate with authorities in prosecuting such gangland figures as Anthony Trigger Mike Coppola, Liz was found guilty of perjury in 1961 and sentenced to 3 years in Terminal Island Prison in California. Before she began serving her sentence, she cashed in on her tabloid notoriety by selling her paintings for up to $5,000 each and recording and broadcasting her poetry readings. Just like I'm doing. In jail, Liz claims she fought off the lesbians and began writing her autobiography, originally entitled Headlines and Heartaches. Once she was released from prison, and the retitled My Face for the World to See became a big seller, Liz was back in the welcome glare of publicity and became a burlesque queen. To promote her new career, she ran completely nude at the age of 47 down Hollywood Boulevard at the height of the streaking fad in 1974. As 3,000 amused onlookers cheered her nude arrest, Liz commented to the press, "I've often thought that if I was born ugly, I could have devoted myself to art and been famous already." The case received so much publicity that the irate judge issued a gag order forbidding Liz to give interviews. When the 8-man, 4-woman grand jury found her not guilty of the indecent exposure charge, after requesting to review the taped account of her streak, Liz emerged victorious and resumed her burlesque career with some fresh publicity, the streaking grandmother. Liz was a dream to work with. After getting over the initial shock of meeting her fellow players, she realized that their appearances were only Van Smith's handiwork and began to relax. Expecting fancy, glittering theatrical costumes, I'm sure she was appalled to see her outfits were made entirely from dish towels, rags, and ripped-up shower curtains, but she did admit that the look fit the character. Liz immediately made friends with the cast and entertained us with stories of prison, the mafia, show business, and plans for a sequel to her autobiography entitled My Ass for the World to Kiss. Liz never balked at the script. Nothing seemed to faze her. Even the scene in which live cockroaches crawled over her nude body. Liz disrobed, arranged herself seductively on the bed, and beamed, "I'm ready." Eddie Parental took the cap off the jar containing the frisky little creatures and dumped the contents on her and raced out of camera sight. I called for action, and the roaches scattered over Liz's backside in a perfect one-take shot. Liz wasn't the slightest bit perplexed. That's entertainment, and we quickly moved along to another scene. With Desperate Living, I got a little closer to my dream of making a film entirely in a studio. I hate reality, and if I could have my way, everything I captured on screen would be fake. The buildings, the trees, the grass, even the horizon. Very few locations were used in Desperate Living. Most of the action took place on 2 massive sets that Vincent Parental designed and built on a ridiculously small budget. The first was Mortville, a small village that was supposed to be the worst possible place you could live. I wanted it to make Tobacco Road look like Beverly Hills by comparison. Mortville was not supposed to be a city of the dead, as some critics have gathered, but a town filled with citizens who were mortified at their daily existence. Mortville was made almost entirely out of garbage. The street was paved, the fake fronts of the characters' shabby homes were raised, decaying dead animals we found in the woods were hung from trees as decorations, and volunteers began showing up with their trash to further litter the grounds and add atmosphere. It was quite satisfying to mar an idyllic country setting by creating such a terrible eyesore. Once filming began, Pat Moran had the added headache of coming up with about 50 extras a day to play the poor, pitiful souls of Mortville. To make sure 50 would show up, Pat would ask 100 and tell them to report in at 6 a.m. where a rented school bus, the Mortville Express, would whisk them off to the country setting. I was against the Mortville extras providing their own transportation because I knew that if they had their own cars, they would escape before I'd finished shooting for the day. Since I wanted some really seedy characters, Pat asked all the lowlife she saw on the street if they wanted to be in a movie. With the help of Bill Platt, one of the backers, who also brought a busload of undesirables, an extremely motley collection of character actors were gathered, and I think they contributed greatly to the fantasy look of the film. All the interiors of Mortville were constructed by Vince and his assistant, Dolores Deluxe, in a huge warehouse rented in downtown Baltimore. After soundproofing the building, they began building each individual set: Flipper's lesbian bar, Queen Carlotta's throne room, the royal bedroom, Princess Cuckoo's chambers, Mole and Muffy's living room, their bedroom, and the shack that Peggy and Griselda rent. The production crew spent so many hours locked away from the rest of the world in this soundproof, windowless vacuum that Desperate Living began to describe our own lives as much as the characters. As winter progressed and the temperatures dropped, I rented a huge kerosene heater to improve morale. The shivering actresses would gather around it, always worrying that a spark would fly out and ignite the cheap material of their costumes. There was only one toilet, and it usually didn't work. There seemed to be dried fake blood and guts everywhere. Since the plot had to do with rabies, we had obtained a number of rats, and they were placed in cages around the studio. It really used to unnerve the cast when they strolled past the cages, and the rats would hurl themselves at the bars trying to attack. Liz Renay caught a horrible cold and began chug-a-lugging cough syrup a doctor had prescribed, so she managed to stay in a pretty cheery mood. But this didn't stop her from gagging when Mole had to pick up a dead rat and begin cooking it for dinner. Liz's stomach also got weak in the scene where Mary Vivian Pierce is foaming at the mouth from rabies. As we put the Alka-Seltzer tablet and green food coloring in Mary's mouth and told her to start sucking up a mouthful of slop, Liz began to tremble with real-life nausea. The shooting schedule was so relentless that the cast started falling apart, and some would break into tears for no apparent reason. Jean Hill became so out of her mind with fatigue that she picked up an actor, threw him against a wall, and knocked him unconscious in a fight scene that was supposed to be simulated. Mink Stoll was quite professional about shooting her nude love scene with Jean, but you could tell she was extremely worried that the 400-pound actress would get carried away and suffocate her to death on film. Susan Lowe, beginning to crack after living her life as Mole for such an extended period, really seemed upset when the Baltimore Sun-Papers reporter showed up to do a story on the making of the film. Since this was Susan's first big starring role, she had been looking forward to the coverage, but never imagined in her wildest nightmares she would meet the newsman as a special effects man attached a fake penis, ugly scars, and dried blood between her legs. Beyond a doubt, the most disgusting task in the making of Desperate Living was cooking the rat for the credits sequence. I wanted the film to open with an overhead shot of a very formal table setting. You'd see the maid's arms put down the napkin and serve a boiled rat, complete with garnish. Another pair of hands would season this gourmet delight, cut into it, and take an off-screen bite. The sequence would end with the unseen diner daintily depositing a rat bone on the plate. I asked everyone I knew, but no one would allow me to cook the rat in their oven. "Cook it in your own oven," they yelled. I solved the problem by suggesting to Vince that he and Alan Rose, the designer of all my credit sequences, sneak into one of our enemies' houses and cook the rat when he wasn't home. They managed to pull it off without getting caught and could only comment, "Boy, did it stink." Being involved in show business these days isn't as glamorous as some people may think. Sarah Risher of New Line Cinema knocked herself out planning the invitational screening for critics, celebrities, and New York opinion makers. As an added ironic touch, she hired a formal chamber music trio to play while the guests guzzled champagne and discussed the film. The critics from Good Housekeeping walked out during the first 10 minutes, but otherwise it was a receptive audience. The New York Times dismissed it with a short review saying, "This one takes the cake." Variety hated it, and Archer Winston said something to the effect of, "If you like this film, you need a psychiatrist." But other critics gave me raves. Playboy said it has to be seen to be believed, and Tom Allen in the Village Voice gave it a big boost. I dare anyone not to take John Waters seriously after Desperate Living. This film is a triumphant example of the most vital bad taste in America. Incredibly, he added, Waters is an austerely economical director who is figuratively comparable to Bresson. Ha! My favorite international comment came from the official censor in London, who wrote to the English distributors, "We do not know how to deal with the subject of intentional bad taste." Sort of famous. Achieving my lifetime goal of making successful exploitation films for art theaters made me deliriously happy, more mature, glowing with inner peace, sort of famous. My cinematic garbage was actually becoming popular all over the world. They always refer to my films as cult movies, and I'm never quite sure what they mean. Sure, I've seen audiences who've seen the film 50 times and can shout out the dialogue, but would this same audience wash and dry my laundry for me? If I put a split-second subliminal message in my film saying, "Send John Waters $1,000, would it work? My idea of a cult audience would be one that would follow my orders if I suddenly appeared on screen and said, "Hello, I'm John Waters. I want you to go home and burn down your house. Find Katharine Hepburn, cut off her head, and bring it to me on a silver platter." All cult really means today is that something is popular and no one foresaw its success. Some people get it, others are assholes. I love living in Baltimore, but I also love getting out of it. My ultimate fantasy would be free, unlimited airfare. Luckily, I get to spend about half my time traveling to promote my demented projects, and I always have one eye opened in search of real-life cheap thrills. When I'm home, I work, relax with my closest friends, and plot how to get my next atrocity financed, so I'll be able to talk somebody into flying me somewhere to blab about the finished project. I'm just as excited to hear I'm going to Iowa City as I am when I get word I'm being flown to Paris. You could never tell what is going on in America if you spend all your time in New York and Los Angeles. The more obscure a town I visit, the greater appeal it has for me, since I figure there's an audience for anything in New York. But if you can get a following in, say, Mobile, Alabama, you really must be doing something right. Whenever I'm asked to do a college lecture, I feel like I've won a contest. All expenses paid, 2 nights in a hotel and a flat fee, all for just standing there and mouthing off my opinions. My close friends in Baltimore are always relieved to hear I have a speaking engagement because they get a break from listening to me rant. Do you have parents? The oddest question I ever get from college students is, do you have parents? I guess by this question they are tactfully trying to ask, what on earth could your parents think? And this I can understand, because whenever I read about some lunatic I admire, this question is the first thing that pops into my mind. Yes, I have parents, and I love them very much. When I'm in Baltimore, I see them about once a week, and even though there certainly have been major disagreements over the years, I think we've managed to get along astonishingly well, considering all they've had to go through. I think their attitude about my career can best be summed up by my mother's comment after seeing a favorable editorial about me in the Baltimore Sun entitled "The Prince of Puke." "Well," she said, "being the Prince of Puke is hardly what we had in mind for you when you were a child." My parents are very straight, thank God. I've always felt extremely embarrassed for friends with parents who try to be hip. I'm proud that my mother and father have never smoked pot, gone to Plato's retreat, or disco danced. I can't think of anything more humiliating than being in a nightclub or at a crazy party and seeing your parents walk in all decked out in trendy clothes, ready to go wild for the evening. I think it's healthy to see your parents often, sort of like a tune-up, but I think it's neurotic to actually hang around with them. No matter how hard you rebel from your parents, you always end up being exactly like them. There can be millions of surface differences on how you live your life, but underneath it all, you will always share their basic beliefs. You could become a drug addict, a necrophiliac, or the President of the United States. But if your parents taught you that it was slothful not to make your bed, you'd end up making it faithfully every day, or neurotically sleeping in a bunch of rags just to prove how wrong they really were. In turn, parents are indelibly influenced by their own children, no matter how weird they may become. The less financial aid parents are asked for, the more they will grow to accept whatever they think aberrant about their child's behavior. As the years pass, parents soften and begin to realize that the leave-it-to-beaver-type family atmosphere they expected is just impossible to achieve. My whole family may have finally gotten used to me, but they still get upset by some of my more lurid publicity. Deep down, they still believe your name should only appear in the paper twice, when you are born and when you die. So-called friends of the family have anonymously mailed to my parents the most negative and sensational reviews, which I think is especially hateful and understandably makes them nervous. When Vincent Canby reviewed Pink Flamingos for the New York Times and commented that I must have had, quote, faulty toilet training, unquote, my mother hit the ceiling. "You did not," she moaned. Why can't they keep me out of it?" I think my parents should relax and realize that today, in my old age and maturity, I only think terrible thoughts. I do not live them. Thank God I am not my films. If audiences can laugh at my twisted ideas, what's the great harm? I can't imagine anyone being influenced enough by my work to actually try to emulate the character's misery in real life. At least I've never done anything really decadent, like waste millions of dollars of other people's money and come up with movies as stupid as Howard the Duck or Ishtar. The budgets of my films could hardly feed the starving children of India.